It's very interesting. The second blessing of the Amidah speaks about the resurrection of the dead. It begins and it concludes with Baruch atah Hashem mechayim mesim. Blessed is God who resurrects the dead. It begins Ato Gibo Le'olam Hashem mechayim mesim Atorav Loshia. Again, God resurrects the dead. And in the blessing, we say God sustains life with Chesed. That's what he does. Mechayim mesim berachmim rabim. God sustains life with Chesed, indiscriminate kindness, and ultimately he will resurrect the dead. Now, why did God create this world? This is very fundamental. God created existence that ultimately man should be a beneficiary of the ultimate. Before he created existence, God had no reason to create existence. What was pushing him? The answer is nothing was pushing him. As the Ramchal says, God being the essence of good on an absolute level, good does good. So what does doing good mean? Create a setting that the human being should be the beneficiary of the absolute good. What's the absolute good? Being able to cleave to him, being exposed to him, sitting in his radiance, which this is what we call the eternal world, the world to come. Now the question is, how do you work it out? How do you work it out? Well, firstly, he has to give life indiscriminately. The good people, bad people, and what about people they don't hone up? So God has to create a system that even though the person doesn't hone up, he is alerted that if he doesn't toe the line, he's going to fail. And what do we have? We have illness, we have success, we have failing. There are all kinds of things. Life could be a roller coaster, and it is a roller coaster. And God is involved in every part of that roller coaster. People get sick, they have to be healed. People have financial reversals. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't come back. But the system, whatever the system is in place, the ultimate objective is that at the end of the day, man becomes part of eternity. If he's worthy, he's part of eternity. And a certain segment of humanity will be part of that eternity. Because God knows the way things are ultimately going to turn out. And if it's going to turn out that it's a failure, he's not even starting the process. So the ultimate objective is resurrection. But why is there a need for resurrection? Because Adam failed. Adam was originally the human being that was meant to live forever. What did he do? He ate of the tree of knowledge. And God says, the day you eat of that fruit of the tree of knowledge, which is good and evil, you will die. And we explained, die means subject to death. Okay? And he ate, and he was driven out of the Garden of Eden. And now all humanity is subject to death. But if you die, what do you have to be resurrected? You die, it's over. The answer is because man ultimately has to be eternal. But how's he eternal if he dies? The answer is he has a worthiness that ultimately, even though he dies, which we'll explain in a moment why he must die, he'll be resurrected to be part of eternity, which is the ultimate objective of creation initially. To be able to cleave to God in body and soul, despite the physicality of the person. That is the objective of the program. God's objective in creation, because that is the ultimate chesed. The man should be a beneficiary of the good on the absolute level. Why does man have to die? Why did God say when Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, he will be subject to death. So we explained many times in Neimet Ramchal that when he ingested that fruit, which is good and evil, evil became an integral part of his being, which exaggerated the level of challenge, which initially wasn't supposed to be that level of challenge, that evil. But even if you succeed at the end of your life, you must die, because man is meant to be eternal, and within this physicality, you cannot be eternal. Why can't you be eternal? Because part of the physicality has embedded in it evil, and that evil can't have any relevance to God. So the man must die, the human must die, he decomposes in the ground, and ultimately when he's resurrected, what aspect of that physicality will be resurrected? The physicality without the evil. The evil will not be part of that physicality anymore. And God then will reunite the soul and that body, and that combination, this composite, will be part of eternity, to be able to cleave to God. And that is the objective of the ultimate chesed, that man should be part of the absolute good. So God created existence for that objective. Adam failed. He destroyed everything, making life endlessly complicated. But at the end of the day, as it says, Atzas Hashem Hitokum, God's program will succeed. And man will be resurrected. And why is the worthiness of man to be resurrected? Because he followed God's script. To be worthy of having a relationship with him. So if God's attribute or main characteristic is chesed, because that's why he created man, so how could the human being not emulate God in that context to reflect that chesed, which God is himself demonstrated through actualizing the world? Therefore, the human being, it's not enough to put on tefillin. It's not enough to observe the Shabbos. All that's not enough. That's only to advance and perfect yourself. But to have the relationship with God and to cleave to God, you must assume his characteristics, his attributes. And what are his attributes? His main attribute is chesed. Because all existence came about only through chesed. So if you don't have that attribute of chesed, you can't cleave to him as you meant to cleave to him. Because as I always say, what is the basis for compatibility? Commonality. So if God displayed the attribute of chesed through creation and the many mitzvahs in the Torah, which are commandments of chesed, charity, lending money to the poor, tithing, the various tithes of the produce of Israel, to the convert, to the Levi who has no share in the land, so he doesn't have the means, to the widow, to the orphan. The Torah continuously addresses these issues. But what is that again? What does that say? Burying the dead, clothing the naked. What is all this? This is chesed on a human level. And if you go and you actualize these attributes during your lifetime, that impacts and that addresses the objective that ultimately you'll be able to cleave at a different level with God. Because you've created a commonality which ultimately will allow the objective of man being the beneficiary of God's goodness to bring it over the top. That's the understanding. No human being could live and exist without chesed. A person dies. Who's going to bury him? Who's going to attend the funeral? A person is not well. Who's going to attend to his medical needs? Who's going to visit him? A person says, I can afford everything. The times, even the wealthy man, he's not able to make it happen unless other people participate. So there's a certain chesed component which is necessary for existence to exist. There's a law that there was a time where people were lax and they didn't tithe the tithes properly in Israel. You're supposed to give 10% to the Levi of the produce that grows in Israel. And they took a poll that although the majority of people who are Amaratzim, these are unlearned people, gave that 10%, there was a significant minority that did not. And therefore they said, if you purchase grain or produce from this segment of population, you can't trust them because there's a good, strong reality that they didn't tithe it. So you have to tithe. You have to tithe it again. It's called rabbinical, it's called demai. We're not sure what it is. What about a person's a poor man? Do we allow him to eat it without tithing it? We allow him to eat it without tithing it. Because the majority do. It's a rabbinic stringency. What about if you have a rich man? He's traveling on the road. So even a rich man, at times where he doesn't have, even if he has his checkbook, he has nobody to write the checkbook for. 2, person carries credit cards, stops off at a rest stop. We don't take cash. You could have that credit card, and you can put out $1 million credit on it, but if they only take cash, the credit card's worth nothing. So a person that's $2 back says, you know something? I'll lend you $1. The one who has this platinum black credit card, doesn't make a difference what you have. Everybody in a certain situation. There's a famous story with Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes was an eccentric when he was a billionaire. And after he died, the person gets a letter from a lawyer that Howard Hughes had left him $10 million. He never met Howard Hughes, had no idea why. Why would Howard Hughes leave him $10 million? So it's interesting. Many years ago, in Hagerstown, Maryland, there was a Trailways bus stop. It was like a hub for Trailways, Hagerstown, Maryland. And Howard Hughes was once there. And in that rest stop, that pay toilets. And he didn't have the change to get into the pay toilet. So there was whatever it is, maybe an attendant, somebody, and you had to put a dime into the pay toilet. Howard Hughes didn't have a dime. So he asked this person, maybe you have a dime, maybe you can lend me a dime. He lent him the dime, put it in, and he was able to use the facility. Comes out, he says to the person, he says, by the way, what's your name? He says, forget about it, it's okay. No, he says, I want to know what your name is. Then I want your name, I want your address. Because I just want to tell you how appreciative I am. And that was the end of the conversation. Fast forward, Howard Hughes dies, at least $10 million. Now you understand why he was eccentric. You understand? Howard Hughes needs the favor of this little 2-bit impoverished person who maybe didn't have more than $3 to his name. But what was the payback? The payback was beyond the lottery. That's what it was. Everybody needs chesed. There are times in our lives we need chesed. Person falls, needs somebody to help him up off the ground. The person's hurt, whatever it is. But again, why did God create a system that everybody, there are times where everybody needs this kindness? The answer is because ultimately, since the objective is to have a relation with him, and you have to emulate his attribute of chesed. Therefore, the setting in life is you must, for existence to exist, you have to have chesed. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Give you an example. Person runs, he has a seat on the stock exchange, and he needs people who have to do certain mathematical calculations, formulas, whatever it is. And he starts teaching his son various formulas, mathematical formulas. Son doesn't understand what does he need it for. The child's too immature to understand what it is. But he doesn't realize when he gets old enough, his father's going to take him into the business, and he's going to work for the firm, his father's firm. Whatever, it's trading, whatever it is. But until then, he doesn't. Why? Why is that important? Because someday when you arrive, you'll understand why you have to have that. Someday when we arrive, we'll understand why things had to be the way they were. Why did God create the world differently? Each person to be independently independent. Why do people have to rely on one another? The answer is, because since that's his attribute, therefore you have to actualize that attribute to have a commonality with him, to be compatible with him. That's the concept. In Pirkei Ahavas, it says the world stands on three principles: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim. Study of Torah, serving God, sacrifices in the temple, and acts of loving kindness. What happens if a person has the first two and the third one he doesn't have? Why? Because he doesn't have the financial means. So you'd say you could do chesed differently. You can do chesed differently. Chesed is not only with money. To be a philanthropist, chesed means to help another person. Level of assistance. However, the difficulty is this. In Torah, you can be outstanding. In Torah. You can be outstanding in serving God. So seemingly, as you can be outstanding in A and B, how are you outstanding in C? Well, I helped an old lady across the street. I helped a fellow homeless guy. I let him wear my shoes. But is that enough? Is that chesed? In Torah, you're mega. In service of God, you're mega. And this thing over here, it's like a pittance. How do you somehow bring a balance? So Rav Chaim Volozhiner explains, and the model is Rav Chanina ben Dosa. Rav Chanina ben Dosa was so impoverished, his weekly subsistence was a small measure of carob. And he lived on that. And there's a heavenly voice that comes out from Sinai every day that says that in the merit of Chanina ben Dosa, the whole world is sustained. God sustains the world, providing food and sustenance in the merit of this holy rabbi. So what level of chesed did Rav Chanina ben Dosa do by being who he was supposed to be? He generated enough energy that provided food and sustenance for the whole existence. So you don't have to necessarily distribute it through currency or through commodities or through actually being involved, assisting a person. If that is what you're accomplishing, you've accomplished it. So even that's chesed. The whole world is eating. And the reason why a person could do philanthropy is because in the merit of this person, he has the ability to do philanthropy. It's an unbelievable idea. I'll give you an example. Chofetz Chaim cites a Zohar, very interesting Zohar. It says that don't underestimate any mitzvah, even though it seems to be an ordinary mitzvah, but you don't know the extent of a mitzvah. You don't know the extent of the reward for the mitzvah. The example is this. If a person does an extraordinary act of chesed, extraordinary, it can be quantitatively qualitative. And God sees it as being extraordinary. God announces to his heavenly retinue of angels that all the chesed that he will do to the entire world is the merit of this one person who did this extraordinary act of chesed. And therefore, all the chesed that God does, all the billions of people beneficiaries, all of that accrues to this one person who did this one act of extraordinary chesed. You can't compute it. It's not computable. So when we say a person is a very special person, and all he has, he could offer somebody else a piece of bread, and he gives the bread to that person, saves his life, and that person was a very special person who he saved. And that person, because of he was so special, was able to provide services to humanity. So what was the value of that chesed? And the chesed, the person gave the bread, he only had that, he had nothing more than the bread to give. And it was considered extraordinary chesed for him because he took the bread out of his own mouth to give to someone else. And to who did he give it? To a person who was going to be invaluable to humanity. So do we know exactly how to connect all the dots? Only God knows. So therefore, you could be a person sitting and studying and doing a small gesture, but that small gesture moves mountains and moves continents and moves the world. That's chesed. The Talmud tells us this. There's a chesed called Torah's chesed. What's Torah's chesed? Torah's chesed is when you do chesed for the sake of chesed, without an ulterior motive. That's called lishma, for the sake of the chesed. When you do without ulterior motive, which is not so simple, when you do something like that, it's not quantitative, it's qualitative. And qualitative is you do with a level of purity. You do chesed anonymously. Nobody even knows. That's the ultimate. Because we're all egos. We have to stroke our egos. We have to sustain our egos. And says, I'm not interested whatsoever. There's a famous story. There was a great rabbi who lived in the 17th century. His name was Rabbi Yol Sirkish. He was known as the Bach. And there was a special cemetery. I think he was in Krakow, was his community. And there was a person who was notorious miser. And people, they cursed the man, because anybody who would want to be helped, and he was a very wealthy man, a Jew, observant Jew, wouldn't give anybody anything. But nobody knew that behind the scenes, he was underwriting the whole community. Except he didn't want to be known. So the only one who knew it was the chief rabbi. It was the best kept secret. When he died, this man who people didn't know who he was, people says, we're going to bury him at the edge of the cemetery. He's not worthy to be associated with people because he never did anything for people. The rabbi said, he will be buried next to me. My burial plot, he will be my partner in the cemetery. He said, why? He says, because what you people don't understand, all the philanthropy that the poor had what to eat, the people were clothed, was due to him. Except he didn't want any credit for it. And he wasn't about people were cursing him. He just didn't want anybody to know because he wanted to do chesed without any ulterior motive, help another person. That was his way of doing it. And you have to say he forgave the people in advance because if that's the case, they were doing the wrong thing. Would they have a right to curse him? He says it's okay. Let them curse me, and what? And I prefer to do it this way. But what's the value? The value is giving significant amount of money, and you get no credit for it, no acknowledgement at any level. It's okay. I don't need the acknowledgement. Let me ask you a question. God does all the chesed in the world. How much acknowledgement does God get for his chesed? People say, B'chalka chai b'chesed, we say in the Amidah. How many people feel indebted to God because Mechalkel Chaim Chesed? You tell me. We state it as a fact, but do we internalize it? Do we feel a level of indebtedness to him because he's Mechalkel Chaim Chesed? Our existence is Chesed. Do you feel beholding to God? You have to be at a special level to have that sense of indebtedness to God. So many people do Chesed anonymously. Nobody knows. And even if they would know, would they really be indebted? Most people not. So it's really, even that is really a reflection of the reality of existence.